And hello, everyone. Very nice to see some familiar faces, lots of new faces. Delighted to have people from other countries as well. It's one of the, we were saying right at the beginning, it's one of the only really good things about COVID is that we've had greater connection with international friends. So it's really good to see you. This is a few points of view, having been a writer, having been a judge, and now with the great honor of being the chair. Just a few things on my learnings about how to win. What I would say up front is there's absolutely no guarantee that these will work, but hopefully they are sort of pointers to you about how it can work. I think there's sort of four key things I want to talk about, really, just in terms of helping you. And I'm particularly, I know Sarah said about sort of writing and presenting. This is particularly about writing, but I do think all four of these are important for if you're lucky enough to get through to presentation stage. The first point, I think, is really critical, and you'll know this as most of you are planners, but it's when you're approaching your paper, I'm taking it from the start point, you've got something really interesting, you've got a campaign that you really like, there is some really good thinking that you're proud of that backs it up. This is all about what's the best way of packaging that and selling that in the written word and then in presentation. And number one, you'll be absolutely not surprised in any way, is just make sure you have a plan, you have a narrative structure of some sort, and lay it all out, work out what that structure is, take us through a story, the journey that you went through on that structure. Just as an example, this I think is a really good one that many people use. I'm not saying you absolutely have to use this, but it's a good guide for the type of structure that I'm talking about. And again, I think this is familiar to many other APG people. I really like it. It really works. And even if you don't use this, think about applying it, because it might make you think about changing your story or slightly reordering your story. So this one here is about, the reflection, ambition that we've got, the jeopardy, the hope, and a solution. So, and that sort of follows a very simple journey: where we are today, then where we could be, the challenge that we've got to overcome, an insight that can help us get through that, and then what finally the idea is. And just to give you a view of that, this is something that I did years ago now, but is still running, which is the Act Fast Stroke campaign. Never entered for an APG award, but just to show you how that structure works. So if we're looking at what the current situation was at that time, we were looking at obviously the emotional upset, the number of deaths and disabilities, but also the care cost that was there at that particular time, which was £3 billion a year. The ambition that they wanted was to reduce the amount of adult death and disability and get people into hospital as quickly as possible, and to get the treatment, which is blood thinning treatment called thrombolysis, and get people into hospital within 3 hours. That's what the ambition was. The problem we had was that people did not know what the symptoms of stroke were and did not know that they needed to call 999 and it was an emergency. And where we got to was actually to discover that paramedics were using this acronym called FAST, which is face, arm, speech, time to call 999. And that we thought, rather than only having that within the paramedic world, let's tell the world about that. And hence the Act Fast campaign came out of it. And that's only to show you how that structure works. But sort of point one, have a framework, have a structure. And work out what the best structure is to tell your story. That's sort of the most important thing. And that structure, why that's also good, is if you really boil it down to 1 or 2 words for each of those, you get what the key points are. And that means that you can tell that story within your 5-minute presentation as much as you can tell that story within the number of words you've got in your written paper. So I think, that's a really good thing to think about. And just sort of following that through in terms of sort of distilling and distilling your idea down, I would also really encourage you to boil down your story, your thinking to as tight a set of words as you possibly can. And again, just to help you on that, I think a really simple structure or simple thing to apply to think about, again, you don't have to do this, you don't have to present your idea like this, but a very simple from to, which is the classic strategic journey. We were here, we wanted to get here, and this is how we did it. Again, is really good. And you'll see a good example, certainly, of that from Tatiana and Barry on their KFC paper that they're going to talk about. But, you know, here's an example from a brand I worked on a while back, Purcell Dirt is Good, where we talked about taking Dirt is Good from being good at stimulating creativity in children to being Dirt is Good at building resilience in children. That was a strategic journey that we took people on at a particular time. And that's where we had an idea like for whatever life throws. This is what Tatiana and Barry will talk about, but I love this description of taking KFC from fast food to fast good. Again, really simple, but really beautifully put there and beautifully laid out. And that's a simple structure from this to this. You know, here's an example of that. Brilliant paper on Barbie, taking Barbie from being 11.5 inches of perfection to a global symbol of potential. And, you know, that's where that one. So again, a really simple journey from this to this, boiled right down to the heart of it. Here we have the story of Change for Life. Again, there's a really good one in that, where you've got the shift from, and what's brilliant about this paper, there's lots of shifts, but I really like the ones from blaming parents to blaming life. And rather than fat bodies, we're moving it to fat in bodies. Really simple shift that they made, boiled right down into that. Direct Line is another fantastic case on this, from rather than being about the point of purchase and sympathy, was about the point of need and action. And that, I think, is just get your story down to the absolute heart, to the real essence of it. Even if you don't present it like that, it's a really good thing to go through, is that you know what the heart and soul of your story is. If you had to write a headline about it, it's about this. If you have to write, you know, you almost think about that as well. It could potentially be your opening line in your paper. It's taking this from here to here. And that's what we did. And that's the story that I want to tell you about, how we did that and what was created by doing that and what effect it had. And there you can see the wonderful Winston Wolfe. What I would also really encourage is thinking about language and how you present these papers. All of the things I've talked about so far, there was nothing amazing in terms of the language, in terms of the cleverness of the words, in terms of the, you know, how florid those words were, and how complicated they were. All of the words I think I've used or have been sort of presented so far have been incredibly simple. And that is also what I would really encourage you to think of. I think when many people come to writing papers for the first time, there's a real danger and trying to make it feel, you know, really clever and really complex and using amazingly complicated and brilliant words. But that's not the way to do it at all. There's a wonderful expression which says that small words chosen well and ordered carefully are strategy's best friend. And that I would very much encourage you to think about. Small words, simple words, how you order them, how they are put together is what it's about. And great strategies and great campaigns are absolutely sold through very simple language and very simple words. Brilliant from Vicky's old campaign, Sport for England, talking about the problem, fear of judgment. There was a fantastic paper from which just said this was it and how they framed the problem. How could we get someone to pay for something they could get for free? Really just incredibly simply written, but very powerful thought. But you can give it a little bit more than that. I love the Audi example here of, you know, we've always had this language of Vorsprung der Technik, and they talked about we'd become too technic, i.e. we become too logical, efficient and precise. What we needed was to be a bit more Vorsprung, a bit more of that progressive thrill and charm. And they also sort of talked about music, selecting a Radio 2 song, but giving it 6 music execution. Again, framing, language, really simple, but really understandable for people. And in this case, very much sort of connected to their particular brand. I love this example as well from KFC, the fries. Again, you can use language such as this to just to make it, you know, feel that it's got a bit about it. Haters gonna hate, use them as bait. But again, it's simple words used in a really clever, brilliant way. Years ago, I was doing, many of you will not know this campaign, but it was for a sexual health campaign. And we had this whole idea about the sex lottery and playing the sex lottery. And we were working with media communications, and they were talking about a media strategy which was less about point of sale, but it was about point of shag. And so it was about taking scratch cards into pubs and clubs and having media on the back of toilet doors, etc. But again, really memorable, simple language that was very powerful and certainly helped the sell of that campaign. I would also very much encourage you to sound out other people when you are writing your paper. Think about, and that doesn't necessarily mean to be other people in your agencies or clients, but it absolutely can be. Sound out journalists, sound out friends of yours who you think are good with words. Think about how would they express or what language would they use to express what your idea is, what the campaign is. You might find that they've got a different way of talking about it, a slight adjustment which helps sell what it is, not changing the meaning of what you're talking about, but just changing the way that it gets remembered or really lands in other people's minds. So that sort of I think is also really key. And you know, the sort of penultimate thing I think is when you come to sort of evidence, think about, you know, clever ways that you might be able to present it. There's a really brilliant example after the Kaepernick campaign from Nike, which looked at the impact on revenue. And they just used, I thought, just this beautiful, and I think this was Scott Galloway, just used this device really simply to explain the impact on it. So it looked at revenue that was actually from the US and non-US, and then the age of customer, and therefore the estimated revenue at risk. But it's just using a simple branded device in this case, very relaxed, very informal, just to present something in a really neat, again, a very sort of wonderful way that really lands in people's heads and sticks there. So that's sort of it. The last thing I would say is that, again, I'm a real bore on this, but don't have any spelling mistakes. You know, if you're proud of what you've got and what you're doing, work on it, make sure it's beautifully polished, it's really well presented, and that, you know, that there aren't any spelling mistakes or grammatical errors that are in there. Take pride in it, and you know, the more that it's polished, the more that there's pride in it, then the more people are going to sort of think, wow, this is just great. If anything is sloppy, if there are lots of spelling mistakes or grammatical errors, as a judge, what happens is you just think that people don't care, and they're just sort of, you know, just rushing it out. This can't be much good. No one really believes in this or cares about it. It's really important. It's a boring, practical thing, but it's a really important thing. You know, just finish on to me, it sort of reiterated a few things that we've all said. Have your narrative, get your story, I love the, think about the problem and the best way of describing that problem. I love that, from the KFC example, the fries were the most served and the most complained about. Really simple, really clear. I love that expression about not just making it right, but making it interesting. And I think all three of those cases were clearly, they were really good campaigns with good thinking, but they were interesting in how they were told. What I think you can also see is you had three very different styles there. And I think, do it in the way that suits you best, that suits your brand best, and suits, the way that you like to be and behave. Look at past papers and how people do it, but don't copy them. Don't think, oh, I've got to do it like that. I've got to make it this sort of great theatrical show. Some people love that. Other people really don't. But do it in the way that is natural to you and really brings out your personality, your way of telling the story, and your brand. And you saw that brilliant, structure that Will and Martin had of the love-hate. That was a great thing for them, for that brand, but it's not going to work across everything. But in making it interesting, always keep it as clear and simple as you possibly can. Don't think interesting equals brilliant, extraordinary words, funny language, overcomplicated things. It's the opposite. It's the simplest, clearest way of saying it. That's what you've really got to search for. And that does take, some people are amazing at that already, but other people, it takes time. You've got to edit and edit and edit. That's why I would always encourage you to sound other people out. How do they talk about it? Because you might find there's a better expression of what you have done that someone else has. You think, oh, that's brilliant. Look at how, the journalists talked about your campaign, because they're often brilliant with words. They might have actually described it in a different way to the agency PR, and it might be a better way of talking about it. I think the other thing I would say to you, if you're coming at this again, is presume ignorance on the panel's part. You are in a bubble. You work with your client day in, day out. You work on there's funny language in there that is used as an internal code, all of that people on the outside have no idea about, and they won't know that, yes, your brand might be very famous and most people might know about it, but presume ignorance that this is, people coming to this for the first time. So tell them really clearly, really simply what the situation is, where it's at, and where you want to go and how you got there. We've seen a lot there about pivoting around one point. I think, again, that's something I would encourage you to do. Really think about what's the headline for this story, and really work that through. Will's point, I think, is excellent, and again, came across from all three of those examples, which is, it's more than the thinking. Celebrate what you did as planners, and on the going above and beyond, how you helped sell it into the client, how you, in difficult situations, if you've done that, really celebrate that, because that is impressive, and it's way beyond just the thinking and the media plan, if you've got that example. The last thing you saw in there is effectiveness. On effectiveness awards, but headlines on how effective that was is good and is needed. But only headlines. You don't need to go into sort of great detail of it, but celebrate it. I think Barry said rightly that many planning people are very modest and humble, but this is about celebration, showcasing, selling. And if it's had an, be brave on that, push yourself on that. Don't exaggerate, tell it as it is, but be unafraid to celebrate the success of it. So that's all I'd sort of finish on in hearing those, and I thought they were fantastic.